Alrighty, hello internet. This is Ben with I don't know, I always say like a different kind of video, but I guess I keep doing different kinds of videos. So this kind of video is in response to a question on the Poppy Seed Pets Discord that I got. If that doesn't make sense, don't worry about it. I'll put links and things in the descriptions. Descriptions. So what I'm going to do here is 3 videos. The question was, how do you update content on your web page? Right, which is kind of, in some ways, a narrow but also a broad question. There's a lot of ways to do it, right? And you can find information on how to do all these things. If you want to do it with just plain old JavaScript, if you want to do it with jQuery, if you want to do it with Angular, there are tutorials to do all these things, go in depth, learn how to do that. What I thought would be interesting is just kind of show a super simple example in 3 different ways. Once with just straight up plain vanilla JavaScript, don't need anything, don't need to use any other third-party packages, whatever. Using jQuery, which is kind of old school, but it is very popular on the internet. You can find things about it. And for getting started, I think it's even better than using vanilla.js. But the comparison, when you see vanilla.js versus jQuery, you can see how it's related, but jQuery just makes it way easier, which in some ways you can get yourself into trouble. Like, if it's easy to do things, it's also easy to do things wrong. But I don't know, I'll talk about that as well. And then finally, Angular. This would be like the pro method. Like, if you already know coding, then this might be the thing you want to do. Really, I more want to include it. So this question came from someone who hasn't done a lot of programming, right? And so I would not expect that person to like jump into Angular. Like, the learning curve is huge, right? But I think it's a very interesting comparison just to see like how totally different of an approach it takes. And how powerful that approach is, for sure. I mean, it's super useful. It's why for huge projects, people like these things like Angular. React and Redux is another one. Vue.js is another big one. These JavaScript MVC, or they use all kinds of acronyms, MVV, whatever. Anyway, these frameworks are popular for good reason. And jQuery is popular for good reason too. It's been around for a long time. It was kind of started to bridge the gap between different browsers when browsers were really bad at following standards, basically. But browsers are a lot better now, which in some cases means like, hey, you don't need jQuery as much, but it is still useful, and I'll show that. And again, it's still widely used. Whether or not it should be, I don't know. That's not for this video to decide. But let's start out with vanilla JavaScript. So I think the thing I want to do, and you can see I put this HTML already on here just to differentiate, so we can easily see here's the jQuery one, here's the Angular one, here's the vanilla.js one. But it's a super simple HTML thing, right? Doc type HTML. Yeah, we want English. Character says UTF-8. You can go online and look up what all these little various things are. Depending on what you're doing, it's not super important that you include these things. Browsers make a lot of these assumptions anyway. Like, you don't really need that line. The browser's not going to whine at you. But if you want to follow standards, and as future versions of HTML or whatever come out, it can be important. So this is best practice. And again, you can look up online if you want to know what all these kinds of things are. This one can be important for older browsers. Again, it's probably not going to matter for what you're doing. And then, but kind of now getting into our actual website, we have the title. That's what shows up here, obviously. And then we're going to include our JavaScript file. It's best practice to keep your JavaScript file in a separate place. Like, you could imagine doing it inline, and you could start writing JavaScript here. I don't know, alert, hello. I mean, you can put that in here and it'll run. Right, bonk, hello. But a reason that you don't want to do this is that when, again, on a larger scale for bigger projects, when someone comes to your web page, the browser has to download the whole web page. But to save time and your bandwidth and the end user's bandwidth and make things faster, it will cache a lot of the resources. So if you have any images, for example, it's not going to download the image every single time that someone comes to the site. It's going to look at just like it's a hash or there's other caching information that might be there, but something to kind of say, here's a sort of a version you could think of this file, and your browser will say, oh yeah, I've already got that version. I don't need to download the whole thing again. It'll do the same thing for these JS files. So when someone comes here and refreshes your page, they'll definitely get the index.html, but they won't re-download the main JS file, which is currently empty, because it won't have changed, and so that'll make it quicker. If you put everything in line, it has no choice but to download them all. So that's a really good reason to put the JavaScript somewhere else. There's also this concept of separation of concerns, which we'll definitely talk about as we go through these. And that's the idea that different parts of the code should be responsible for what they're responsible for and not try to do the jobs of anyone else. So for those kinds of reasons, we won't be putting any JavaScript in here. Like, there are ways you can make, you can make buttons and say, click me, and you can put a little click handler. You can say on click, alert hello, right? You can do this and put your JavaScript straight inside your HTML. Totally do that. We're going to avoid doing that. It's again and it's kind of weird because then once we get into Angular, we kind of break that, but for good reason, because they just organize things differently. But we're going to keep the JavaScript out of the HTML entirely, and I'll kind of show more of why that is. So let's just go ahead and start coding things. So the question again was, hey, I want to update some content on the web page. So I'm thinking, and let me just refresh to get that button out of there. Let's imagine a basic game. We're not going to have a login system, right? If you're going to have like register and login and everything, that would require a database and all this other stuff, which we're not going to deal with. But there are kind of single page games that just kind of run in your browser and don't need any sort of account. I'm thinking of like Candy Box and Fraction Frogs, which are both very old by this point. But I'm sure there's modern examples. I just don't know them because I'm an old person, I guess. I don't know. So I'm going to let's make a super simple game like that. So I'm going to put a little header tag on the top of the page. I'm just going to try and be semantic. It can be an H1. But if we were going to style this up, you might imagine that the footer was like positioned to always be at the bottom and the header would always be floating at the top regardless of how you scroll and all that. We're not going to bother to code all that up. That would all be CSS stuff, which isn't what this is about. But I'm just kind of thinking along those lines and choosing HTML tags appropriately. So let's say welcome, and let's start out by hard coding the thing. So I'm going to say welcome Ben. That's the sort of string that we're going to want to replace, right? And then we'll have some content. This is the game. It's great. And then we'll have some stats. So let's have like I don't know, strength will be 5 because I'm not super strong, and intelligence, I don't know. We'll be generous to myself today and say I don't know what this is out of. Wait, now that makes it like turn it up to 11. That's not what I meant. Let's say 9. I don't know. Are we out of 10? I don't know what this is out of. And then whoops, getting a little crazy with my tags here. And then I don't know, charisma. That's another traditional stat in games or something. Let's say my charisma is better than my strength, but still not that great. All right, so I don't know. Here's some stats, right? These are the sorts of things on a page that we might want to change up. And also, for example, let's put another instance of my name because that will be more interesting, as we'll see. So we'll say like these are Ben's stats, right? Let's look at what this looks like. So DL, I don't know, maybe I should have said, that's not like a super common tag you see a lot. And I don't know, this is kind of a weird use of it maybe. It's a definition list, and then we have what's the definition, title, strength, and what's the definition? The definition of the definition is 5. That's what these tags are. I mean, I could have done this with a table. I could have done it with a list. There's a bajillion ways. I don't clearly know why I picked this one. It's relatively semantic. The point of HTML tags is you should pick things that don't represent layout, let your CSS do that, but accurately describe or name what the content is, right? So are your stats definitions? I guess, right? They can be thought of that way. It's kind of weird. I mean, a table, yeah, you could put this in a table of data too, I suppose. That would be semantic, right? So there's different ways you could do it. You're listing out your stats, right? So whatever. I chose definition list. It's honestly kind of probably a weird pick, but I'm going to stick with it. Now we want to actually make this dynamic, right? So we're going to need to do that in some JavaScript. And one of the reasons, so the first kind of problem of JavaScript is I mentioned before that, your browser will download this whole file, and then it'll get to main.js and say, oh, I don't have that file. Do I have it already? Yes or no? In this case, the first time the user visits, it's going to say, no, you don't have a file, and the browser's going to go off and get it. But it might start grabbing this file super crazy soon. Like it might grab it, maybe it's only loaded this far, and the browser's going through and it says, okay, great, I need to go get that main.js file. I'm going to go grab it. And maybe for whatever network reasons or who knows, it manages to download that file before it even completes. Maybe it gets up to like, I don't know, here or something, and then but it's already managed to download the main.js. If that starts running on this incomplete document, you're going to get like weird behavior and weird problems. And there are reasons too, actually, why you wouldn't put the script in the, it's usually best practice to put your script at the bottom of the body tag. So maybe let's go ahead and do that. But the problem, for the purposes of illustrating this problem, let's leave it up top. Again, when you're doing a bigger project, you have a framework that solves all these kinds of things for you without you having to think about it. But the problem is the same. You don't know when resource is going to be loaded up. And the same problem really happens if you have it on the bottom. If you put in a click handler here that says, I don't know, there's a button that does something, but it tries to call some JavaScript in the main.js, then you're running JavaScript here that hasn't loaded yet. So either way, you're going to have a problem. I don't know if that made a whole lot of sense. That probably means I should explain it more, but well, we'll get into it. I'll get into it once we actually have some JavaScript to talk about. It'll make more sense. So let's start writing some JavaScript. And the JavaScript we want to write here, and you'll see this in jQuery. Again, it's super similar. The vanilla JS way, same concept. What we need to do is wait for the whole document to be loaded. And fortunately, the browser will emit an event that says, hey, the whole DOM has been loaded up. And the DOM, by the way, is the document object model or something like that. But when your browser downloads all this HTML, it kind of creates like a map in memory of how this thing is laid out. It's not just working on pure text all the time. It puts together a tree of like, there's a head inside this HTML and there's a P inside this body and it's after the header, orders, and who knows, they store all kinds of stuff in order to make rendering as fast as possible. And I'm sure, super smart Google and Mozilla engineers and Microsoft engineers are all keeping in mind JavaScript is going to operate on this thing. We want to make sure that this is, whatever representation that we have of the web page in memory, it's really efficient for the sorts of JavaScript that we know people are going to want to execute, right? So who knows how they've done it? Something crazy complicated, doesn't matter. The point is, they'll let us know, hey, we're done. We've loaded up the whole document. We've got our document object model in memory. We're ready. You can go now. And so this event, and a lot of JavaScript is based on waiting for events. In this case, and this is something you just have to know, but document is this JavaScript thing, object, that you always have. You don't have to, I don't know, there's other objects you'd have to like make, instantiate them. But document is just always available, and it holds all kinds of information about the document. Here we can see the title. We could change the title by running this. Let's do it now. Hi. Now the title is hi, right? So we have all these little things we can mess with. What we want to add, again, is a listener for this event that says, hey, I'm done. And you can do that with add event listener. Document, again, kind of represents this whole thing. You can add event listeners to individual things. So when we start getting a button that you can click on, we'll add an event listener that way. Again, I'll get there later. But let's add this one. This, unfortunately, you just kind of have to know. You're like, well, what are the event listeners? And if we can jump to definition here. And I should talk about that too. This is an IDE called Phpstorm. There are others out there. They're very useful. They'll tell you like what all these functions do. And like autocomplete, as you probably saw me. I should have called more attention to it at the time, but right, I just type here and it's like auto-completing. It's showing me like all these things I can do, right? There's an on-click, there's anchors, what does that do? Applets, body, right? There's all this crazy stuff. And if you want to know what any of them are, first of all, it's super helpful because I don't have to remember this whole string or type it. I just select the one I want and press enter. But the other nice thing is in Phpstorm in particular, you can hold down Control and click on a thing, or you can press Control B, that's just the shortcut they have. And it'll jump to wherever that thing that the cursor is on, like where was that defined? And in the case of built-in things, like that's more helpful in your code, which I can show that off later. But anyway, we can get some definitions like, okay, what is an add event listener? It's a function. What are its arguments? One is the type. Okay, that's a string. And for some of this, it would be you'd get a better description Googling, which is worth doing as well if you want to know like what are the events that a particular object emits. But anyway, it needs to know the type of event that we're going to listen for, and then the listener, which is a function of our own, and you can see it says function is one of the types allowed here. So we'll give it a function of here's what you should execute when this event happens. And then there's this use capture. I don't honestly know what that is. I didn't even know this took 3 arguments until just now because I never used the third one. So that would be an interesting thing to Google. It apparently defaults to false. That's what this means. And again, really the best place. Sometimes you'll jump to definition. They'll have descriptions built in here. Like Phpstorm is really geared toward PHP, so if I jumped to the definition of some built-in PHP function, it almost has like a whole documentation on that function right there. Not quite, you'd still get better information online, but it will tell you more about like, here's what this function does, here's what it's expecting, blah, 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 blah. It tells you all this information. The JavaScript apparently is a little lighter for what they have built in. Anyway, kind of what I'm getting at is like this, you would just kind of have to Google, like, how would you know, right? How would you know about add event listener and about listening to events? That you just have to already know about JavaScript in general. With jQuery, it's a little more abstracted, but events are still a big part. I mean, they always are. And then in Angular, it's even more abstracted way, and you have to worry about this. But anyway, why I'm saying all this is the string here that you need is bananas, and I only know it because I have it loaded up on another monitor. I have not memorized this. I haven't used Vanilla.js in so long. I certainly don't remember these bizarre strings. But let's Google it up just to like prove it's a real thing. JavaScript event that fires when the DOM is loaded, but before all page assets are loaded, so CSS images, etc. That's good to know. I believe there are other events that are like when there's more. And then they'll show you an example. You can add it to the whole window. Interesting. I'm doing it to the document. That has worked. I don't know if there's a distinction on when you'd want the window versus the document, but whatever. And this is very similar to what we're going to do. There are no doubt lists if you wanted to know, like, let's say since they're saying window, JS events. Like, what are all the events that are possible, you know? Hopefully something will tell us. But these are the sorts of things you need to Google if you're like, well, I want to wait for something else. How do I do that? You just have to kind of have a starting place and go, well, there's other types of events, right? What are there? Let's Google around and see if we can find them. I'm not finding any. I was hoping there would just be like a convenient list. But anyway, I'm probably explaining this way too much. So there was some funky syntax they had there. Well, let me show you a couple ways to do this. So what we need is a function to call, right? We have to give this a function of what's going to happen when the DOM content is loaded. We're going to make up our own function. We can call it initialize. Initialize. And at first what I'm going to do is just change the name of the, but let's console log hello again, just to, again, prove this is working. And it's not, for some reason. Did I do something wrong already? Index.html, main.js. We can ask the console if it thinks I did anything wrong. Oh, console log, sorry, I did the wrong thing. I meant to say alert hello as the example. There we go, hello, good, it is working. Right, so when the DOM content is loaded, we call this function is called, it does alert. What you can do instead, for something like, for event handlers especially, there's almost no time that you would call them except when that event runs, right? Like, we're not going to call initialize a second time or a third time. What would that even do to our application? Probably something bananas. And you might think, well, maybe they want to restart the game, but I think I'll be able to show in this example why this isn't the case. You still wouldn't do that for the event handler. So what we can do instead is we can make these functions. They're called anonymous functions because they don't have a name or delegates or other things. I mean, that's more about how you use it, but whatever. So you can just kind of define a function in line and say, yeah, you wanted a function here? I got one right here. I'm just going to make it up right here. Here it is, function. And I don't know, people online prefer to put the curly brace up there, so we'll follow their lead. It doesn't really matter. It's white space insensitive. You could do this if you wanted, but why would you do that? That makes it hard to read, right? So anyway, you define this function right here, and you say, great, yeah, here's my function. It's right here, alert hello, and this will work. And the reason to do this is kind of convenience. Like, you know, if I had a function, if I was going to still use a function called initialize, you could imagine that, you know, maybe some other time I make more functions. Like, I do have the new game function, and I do have a function that's like, I don't know, gain charisma or whatever. And then over time, we have this situation where we're like, oh, it runs initialize? What's initialize? And we can do this control click and it will take us here. Great. But right, you can imagine this file being longer, or maybe you were being tidy, now you have multiple JS files, right? And then you have to like jump between this huge code base to find your initialize function because it got so separated from where it's actually used. And again, since we know we're never going to use initialize anywhere else for any other purpose, we might as well instead just have it right here. Now there's no question. It can't get separated. Also, by doing it this way, we know no one else can call it again. We don't want anyone else to call this function again. It should only be called once when the DOM is loaded. So this is just it's a feature of the language. You can make up a function on the fly and pass it into another function, which may be, oh my gosh, wrap your head around that if that seems confusing, right? Because this is a function, we're passing a function to a function, what? Yeah, it's just a feature of the language, and a lot of languages have this. I mean, PHP and C# and Java probably, it must. I just haven't used Java in a long time, so I can't speak with confidence. But they all have this feature of you can just make up functions on the fly, and they call them vaguely different things, but it's the same idea, and it has kind of the same purpose. You know, here's a function, one-off, yeah, just use it, I don't need it again. I just want it here, it's super small, whatever. So anyway, enough of that. So what we actually want to do when the thing loads is we want to, you know, let's customize this content. Let's replace the name, and I won't do all the stats because once we see one, it's kind of irrelevant. You know, we don't need to do all three. So let's do the name and like strength. So let's start with the name. How are we going to change up the name? What you need to do, I mean, so we need to, you know, find this string Ben and this string Ben and replace it with a name. But like, we don't want to actually think about this as this is all text and we're going to look for the letters B-E-N and replace it with player name or something. That would, besides being very slow, is not how, like, JavaScript isn't going to give you the ability to alter it in that way. What you really need is some sort of tag with a class or ID or something that you can use to find and say, hey, browser, find me, you know, like you could say, hey, find me the header tag. Great, I found the header tag. Let's replace the content with welcome, comma, Abby, if that's your name, or whatever the player's name is, right? But that gets a little messy because what if later on we decide that we want to say hi? Well, then we have to go and change it in the code. What we'd really like is just have something that, you know, very targeted, like, no, just this part, just the name. That's all we want to do. So let's go ahead and put it in a span tag. Span is convenient because it's in line. Like, I mean, I'll show you, right? It will look no different. Let's change it back to welcome, I guess. But from the user's point of view, there's no change. And that's like kind of the intended design of span. If you compare that with div is a block element. It's going to go on a new line. That's not the effect we want. And yeah, you could use like a bold tag or something, but then that makes the text bold, and that's not what we want. Also, bold isn't semantic. They say don't use that anymore. But I say that too, just to be clear. So span is a very good tag, and div and span are kind of your go-to, I need something to wrap some content, and I don't want any styling. And really the difference between span and div is that span is inline like this, and div is block, meaning it's going to go on its own line like we just saw. And all those things you can change with styling. You can apply CSS to change all that stuff, but kind of don't, because no one is expecting that. Like, you know, if you ever work on a team project, you're not going to find people making all of their divs act in line or you know, all their spans act as block. I mean, maybe in weird circumstances, but it's like, why? Just use a div if you want block and use a span if you don't, right? So anyway, again, use them as intended, because then that helps other people or yourself, right? In 6 months, I always try to think of myself in 6 months as a totally different person who doesn't remember anything from 6 months ago, or only part of things, which can sometimes be worse. But anyway, we're going to need a way. We don't want to just say all spans, because, you know, for the same reason we're going to have a span around strength. So you can ask the browser, hey, find all the span tags, but we need to be able to identify one span tag versus another. So I'm going to give this a class. I'm going to give it a nice semantic named class, right? We don't have to be sparing with our letters. We have plenty of disk space. And for bandwidth, we'll talk about that later too. It's fine. Oops, and sorry, that's not player name. That would be a horrible mistake. I was thinking about this instance of the name, right? This is why I wanted to do 2 instances of the name, just to kind of show how we'll be able to replace all of them at once. It'll be very convenient. No matter, right, whenever they change the name, bam, just update everyone on the page. It's great. And then for this one, we'll call this player strength. One thing that can happen, I was talking about this with a friend of mine, friend/coworker, well, not anymore, but anyway, the classes are used in CSS to style things up. They're also very handy on the JavaScript side for doing logic like we're about to do. For that reason, it gets dangerous when you start mixing, like, this is what's used for view and this is what's used for logic, like we were talking about the separation of concerns. Like, you know, if it happened that we wanted the player name to be green, we might make some styling that says, yeah, make all player names green, but then maybe some other developer sees that, and or it wouldn't happen in that order, but I don't know, maybe you started the other way and you're like, yeah, we always want the player's name to be green. I'm gonna make a class called green. And then later on, now you're making JavaScript and you're like, oh great, I already know, I've wrapped all the names in green. I'll use the green class to go and change the name. But green means green, so you might have used it other places later on, not just for, maybe there's something else like, oh, here is a good effect, we'll call that green. Oh, I already have a class called green, great, I can use that. And then you start to get into trouble. So those are the sorts of reasons to, like, I don't know if that was followable, just speaking, but those are the kinds of reasons why you want to keep things separate and like semantic for the point, right? If you call it green, it's going to get used in ways you didn't expect to make text green. And then you have JavaScript that says, find all things green and make that the name. Well, why? What does green have to do with the name, right? So let's make player name be the class. And if we wanted a green one also, we could add that. Like, you can do that kind of thing. So I don't know. Sorry. I don't know if I should, these topics are too much for an intro video. All these best practices. There's a lot to think about with programming, oh my goodness. So sorry. So we have the player names now wrapped in a convenient tag that will make them easy to locate. So now let's go locate them. So there is another function on this document guide called get elements by class name. Yep, here it is. You can get elements by all kinds of things. Sorry, attributes. If there were other attributes like get anonymous element by attribute. I don't actually know what anonymous refers to. There should just be get element by. I actually don't know what that's about. By ID, if we had a CSS ID, by tag name, all spans, right? We're going to do class name. We have given it a convenient class. We want classes of player name. I'm kind of curious about get anonymous. I don't actually know what that's about. I'll Google it up later if I remember. But anyway, this function now will get me all tags that have that class, and we're going to want to do things with that list, so we'll assign it to a variable. So this will be our player name elements. Semicolons at the end of the line. Right, this function again gets all the elements that match, and we'll stick it in variable. And just to, I don't know, let's check our work so far. Put it on the console. So that's what console log does, puts in the console, useful for when you're doing this kind of simple debugging. And let's confirm. It says it got a collection of 2 elements. Here's the 0th one. Oh my goodness, it has a lot of things in it. And here's the first one. And it looks like, I didn't realize it would do that. That's kind of fancy. So we can actually hover over these and it shows us where in the document they're from. So great, we can see that this has been working so far. We have found the 2 instances where the name Ben is. Now we need to loop over them. Again, we don't know how many there's going to be, right? On one page, maybe it's only once. On another page, maybe it's like 5 freaking times. So we don't care. We just say get them all. And now we're going to loop over them. So we're going to go from 0 to, right, because we saw it starts with the 0th element. And we want less than the length. So the length is 2, and we're going to want 0 and 1, right? We have the 0th element and the first element. The length is 2, so we're going to count starting at 0, and only as long as we're less than 2. So we're going to get 0 and 1. And that's a super common, again, I'm kind of making this for, and I'm hoping for new developers, although I'm going all these crazy tangents on best practices and stuff that probably are a bit much. But that's a very common way you'll see of looping over lists of things. Computers usually index from 0 unless you're using some bananas horrible language like Visual Basic or something, which starts at 1. I'm pretty sure Visual Basic does. But most things start at 0. That's how it should be. I don't know. That's kind of a bias. I don't know. That's how most languages are. That's the convention. A lot of languages are going to start at 0. So anyway, so this is the sort of thing you'll see a lot. Like, I want to count from 1 to 10. Well, you're actually going to count from 0 to less than 10 or something. You'll see that kind of thing a lot. And I don't know. I can see how that's not necessarily intuitive, but you see it so much, you do it so much, and it's like, yeah, of course, that's just what we do. And then we're going to keep counting. Plus means increment it by 1 every time we go through this loop. Again, hopefully you know this part. If you're doing any amount of JavaScript, oh my gosh, I hope you know about for loops. So we're going to loop through all of them. And then for the ith one, right, the 0th and then the first, there is an inner text element. There's also inner HTML. For security reasons that, again, maybe I won't go into for an introductory sort of thing, text is the safer one. You want to set text. If you're setting HTML, long story short, there's these XSS cross-site scripting vulnerabilities. Once you start making something with the database, those are concerns you have. Just use inner text. There's almost no reason you should be setting inner HTML. You should always be setting the text. So we're going to set the text. Let's use that Abby name I made as an example, and let's refresh. Our name is Abby. Oh my goodness. So Right? There you go. We have replaced text on the page. But let's kind of go a little further. I think one thing, and we'll see this in the Angular side as well, it's like startlingly easier. It's going to get easier with as we go through these tabs. But to have a button you can click, we could rig up something that's like enter your name, right? But that's going to be, I don't know, more work. What would be really easy is to have like drink a potion of strength, and it's going to tick your strength up by 1. So I think that's a really good example of a thing we can do. So we can do a similar thing. I mean, let's find all of the elements that have the strength, right? We had this player strength thing, and that might be on any number of things. So we'll have our player strength elements doing the same thing. And let's set it to, I don't know, 6 to see, right? Currently my strength is 5. We should see it be 6. Great. But what we'd really like is kind of, you know, if you're making a game, or really for any thing where you have like this notion of a bunch of data, right? We've got this name, we've got this strength, we've got intelligence, charisma, you're probably going to get experience and all these things. We should store that all in one place, like a game state. And that's what I'm going to call it. So I'm going to make an object that holds the entire state of the game, and that will include like the player's name, whatever stats they have, maybe their level, you know, all this other stuff that your program might have. So let's say that it is going to be Abby, and her strength is, you know, maybe her strength is better. She's stronger than I am, and just as intelligent, but maybe because we want balanced characters, has less charisma, right? We give +5, so we'll do, oh, that's so unfortunate. You know what? Probably more charismatic than I am too. All right, so let's say that this is our character, Abby. And we're going to have it in a nice game state. And now what we might say instead is, the inner text is the game state name of the character. And then here we'll do the game state, the strength of the character. And the reason to do this, I mean, first, we don't want it hard-coded, right? I mean, we've already hard-coded it. We just kind of moved the hard coding. But in the future, when we have a button that's going to increment strength, we can't just have it hard-coded here. Or if you were going to allow someone to name the thing, you know, their character, we can't have it hard-coded in here as Abby. It has to pull from something. We're gonna have to store it somewhere. So a game state is a pretty good place to do this. And as your project got more complicated, you might say, well, actually, there's a player called this, and then there's also, you know, a list of monsters, and they have these properties, right? So this thing could get big and over time, but that's fine. It's great that it's all in one object. This will make it much easier to save. If you wanted to save the whole game, you're like, well, what do I save? We'll save just this one object. That's all you need. Just the game state. Bam, put it in a file or in a database or in local storage or a cookie or whatever, right? There's a million ways you can save things depending on what you're doing. But by having it all in one place, that makes it super easy. You know exactly where to update. And then for these kinds of loops and things where you're updating the DOM, you know exactly where you're pulling from, right? We've got one place. That's our data storage. Yeah, it's kind of an ORM, not really, but again, I'm getting whatever. All right, so let's make a button, although I kind of want to do, no, let's start making a button. Let's start making a button. So let's make a little button we can click, and again, we will have this button be drink strength potion. And when you click this, we're going to want to increase the strength every time you drink a strength potion, right? So right now, it's not going to do anything. Doesn't matter how much I click. Glad to see that Abby's stats are coming in. Oh, her other things weren't coming in of like intelligence and charisma. So I guess we should just, here, let's put that back so that it matches. Again, we could do the same thing and copy paste with strength and blah, 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 blah. I'm not going to bother for the purposes of this example. Clicking on this doesn't do anything. So we need to do the same kind of thing. We're going to give this something so that we can find it in the DOM. And then we're going to add an event handler on it like we did before, right? So this is attached to the document. We say, hey, document, whenever you emit a DOM content loaded event, I'm listening for this function. We're going to do the same thing for this button. We're going to say, hey, whenever this particular button receives a click event, then I want to do X, Y, or Z thing. So first we need a way to find it. Since this is probably the only strength potion, I don't know, right? We know there's only going to be one element, so I'm choosing to do an ID here. If there was going to be multiple, then you would use a class. But there's only going to be one strength potion, I guess. Whatever. So I'm giving it an ID. It'll be good to show different examples anyway. So for that, we're going to get the document or the element by ID, which we saw before. Yep. And the ID is strength potion. And so again, we know there's only one. in fact, getElementById only returns one element. We're not getting an array. We don't need to assign this to a variable, so, we might do strength potion here, and then what we would do is say strength potion, whoops, it's trying to autocomplete helpfully for me, strength potion dot add event listener, right? We can do that. We can make a click event listener, and there's going to be other stuff in here. So I'll fill that in later. But it was useful here where we assigned player names because we actually needed to use it a couple different times. Like we wanted to count up to it, and then we needed to index into it to find each one and replace the name. For the strength potion, we're not going to use it multiple times. We only need to do one thing with it. And for that reason, we don't need to assign it a variable. So I'm inclined to do this instead and just say, yeah, get that element and assign it an event listener. If we were going to do like 10 different things with it, we would probably want it on another variable. We're not. We just need an event listener. Like, I don't know, maybe you'd have multiple. Maybe you want to know when they mouse down on the button and then when they mouse up. Those are different events you can listen for as well. And then you'd probably assign it to a variable. I'm going to do it this way. I don't know. Again, this is something you might see in the wild, so out in other people's code. So same kind of pattern as before. Here's the object, right? And before it was document. Here it's this particular element. We're going to add an event listener. It's the click event this time, not the DOM content loaded. I don't think an individual element even emits the DOM content loaded. Maybe it does, I don't know. But button for sure has click and mouse down and mouse up, and you can even do mouse over. So the moment they mouse, the mouse hovers over the element, you could do something, and then when it leaves, there's mouse out, and there's all kinds of things. Key up and key down. If you want to respond to them pressing spacebar to click the button instead of using the mouse, whatever. You've got all kinds of events. Again, those are things you would need to look up online. And almost all elements there's like a common set, right? You can mouse over almost any element, and so I'm pretty sure every element in the DOM has mouse over events that it will emit. Some things, I don't know, there's probably some weird examples that don't. I can't think of them off the top of my head. But anyway, we'll respond to a click for the strength potion. In that case, we're going to do, game state. So we'll do game state strength plus plus. We want to increment the strength. But now we need to, if we do this, okay, let's go ahead and do this. We can increase the strength. And I promise you it's increasing, but it doesn't know to go back over and increase and change the value that we've seen on screen, right? Like we did that here once, the moment the DOM had loaded, but we really want to do it again. Really, we want to do it every time the game state changes, right? Anytime the game state has changed, we're going to want to update the DOM. So I think what we want to do instead is something like this. We'll make a new function called update DOM, and we'll call it in both places, right? We'll call it when the page loads and every time they click the button. And now I'll make this function called update DOM, and it will handle updating, right? So, and this should just work. So now it updates at the beginning. We still have Abby instead of Ben, right? We still have the strength of 7 instead of 5. And now when I drink potion, it calls it, and it's great. And we can increase the strength as much as we want. There are other little things we might do. So hard coding, like we said, we shouldn't have things hard coded in here so much. What we really probably want to do is start the game state totally empty. And when the game starts, when someone clicks new game or something, then or load, right? We might load it up from, again, we said we might write it to disk or to cookies or whatever. So what we probably want is some sort of load game function that will set up or new game or something like that. Let's call it new game. And new game would do, let's say it defaults to this. In reality, you probably would want a thing where you ask, hey, what's your name? And then, I don't know, maybe you're even allowed to customize your stats at the beginning, or maybe not. Maybe they all start as ones or something, I don't know. So then what you might do is say, okay, when the game starts, when the DOM is loaded, we'll start a new game, we'll update the DOM. Actually, what we should do, again, anytime the game state changes, we should update the DOM, right? Anytime at all this changes, update the DOM. And once we get to Angular, we'll see how this is made much handier, right? Like here with Vanilla.js and jQuery as well, we're going to have to remember, we're going to have to hammer that into our own heads. Every time the game state changes, make sure you update the DOM. Otherwise, things are going to get out of sync and the player won't see. Frameworks like Angular take care of that for you. Another problem you might have noticed is that when we drink a strength potion, and I should reload just to prove this still works. Every time I drink a strength potion, it also finds all the player name things and updates the all these Abby places to fill in a name, even though the name didn't change. All we really changed was the strength. And once we have, if we had the intelligence, if we copied this for intelligence, charisma, other things on the screen, it's inefficient to, only strength change, but we had to like write everything back out onto the page. That's a little inefficient. For what we're doing here, it wouldn't matter. But again, Angular has like totally solved that for you. It keeps track of everything, who even knows how, and says, oh, you updated the strength, great, I'll just make sure to only update those. If you wanted to do that by hand, that would be a huge bananas undertaking. You'd have to do something much more difficult than this, so we're not going to do it. The only final thing that I kind of want to do here, as the game goes on, there's going to be a ton of event handlers, right? You might have, like, again, a field where you actually enter your name and all these things. And this function would end up getting very long with like all these event handlers and other things that you set up. So for tidiness, again, and I'll talk about more later, but we probably want to set up event handlers or something. I don't know, set up the page. Just kind of like our initialization logic. So what we would really like is each function, ideally, you can easily look at it and be like, what is it doing, right? And this thing would get so big that we'd probably end up splitting up setup event handlers into separate ones, or like, here's the event handlers for when you're in a battle. Here's the event handlers for when you're on the world map. Here's the event handlers for, when you're looking at your inventory, whatever. So every function, hopefully, is pretty small, self-contained. You can look at it and be like, yeah, that's exactly what that function does, right? Like, what happens when the DOM is loaded? Oh, we set up all the event handlers and we start a new game. Done, that's all you need to know. And that's so much easier than having to, like, again, if we had 3 different potions you could drink, or a button to let you rename things, or open up the world map, right, and have all those, and then you'd be looking at DOM content loaded being like, what does this do? It's like, okay, it's doing a bunch of event handlers for like map and stuff. Okay, I guess this is all set up, scroll. Okay, and here it's starting the new game, right? You don't want to be in that situation. So it's a good idea to break up your functions into fairly, you can go in crazy extremes, right? You could go too far and say every single little thing is going to be a separate function, right? So it is a medium. I would say whatever. When things are inconvenient for you as a programmer, when you find yourself scrolling all the time, or you don't remember what things do, that should be a hint to you. It's like, maybe I could organize this better, break things out into functions, or bring things together. Maybe I split things out too much at the time, or whatever. So whatever. Anyway, I think this is it though. I think this kind of shows the basics in plain old JavaScript, right? And just to recap, what do we have to do? In all of them, we're gonna have to do this in jQuery. We won't have to do it in Angular because Angular will do it for us, but they're doing it themselves as well. Wait for the DOM to be loaded. Wait for the whole web page to be loaded. Definitely always do that. Attach your event handlers. You're gonna need those. And have kind of, a model of your game. What is the state of the application right now? What's the state of the game? Again, we might have load and save that would operate on this and do other things. And then update the DOM. Whenever you change the data in any way, you have this thing to update the document object model, go through the HTML and do whatever you need to do. And how do you know where to update things? Preferably with nicely named classes on spans or divs or whatever you need. They can be bold tags. Maybe you wanted the name to be, I shouldn't use bold as an example, I don't know. Maybe you really wanted it to be strong text here. Actually, it already is because of H4, so that's a bad example. Whatever you wanted it to be, it doesn't matter. It has the nice class, that's what matters. Class that identifies it for this DOM update. And that's a little, I don't know, in some ways that's a little messy too. Again, we'll see how we can get away with that, or away from that in Angular. But I've probably been rambling quite long enough. In fact, I've been rambling for 43 minutes. That's bananas. The next video, I will do the exact same thing. We'll just like copy, paste, and make some changes and do it in jQuery. It should go much faster because we've already done all the hard work and all the explaining and tangents. I hope I don't have too many more. And then we'll do it again in Angular where we won't copy paste because again, Angular is bananas and different. So anyway, I hope that was useful. And I will also say, if you haven't done much programming, knowing the vanilla JS way, I think is useful. But I would recommend doing jQuery first. jQuery will make it a lot easier. as we'll soon see. But again, it's useful to know like what's going on. Oh, we're getting things by name. Like jQuery does all that. It just kind of like hides it a little, but that's still what's happening. And so it's useful to know how things are working under the hood, especially when things go wrong. That's when you're like, wait, why is it going wrong? If you know how things work under the hood, it's easier to debug these issues. So anyway, thank you again. The next video also again will be shorter, and I'll have put descriptions for links of those videos in the description. And also all this code I've put online in a Git repository, and I will link that as well. So anyway, thanks again, and hopefully see you in the next video.